Ball is a fan of the Chicago Bulls, Air Max sneakers, and Michael Jordan. He studies at prestigious schools in Switzerland, goes to Disneyland, speaks several languages, and enjoys all the achievements and values of Western civilization. His classmates know him by the name Kin, and then this modest and well-educated young man becomes the leader of a small country. He promises to improve the lives of ordinary people, organizes grand construction projects, and the world learns his real name, Kim Jong Un. Along with his real achievements, he creates reliable nuclear protection for his country, and for himself, unlimited power, for the sake of which he is ready to do anything, eliminate his own uncle and any opposition, close the borders as none of his predecessors ever did, and suppress any information about the Western world, the very world where he essentially grew up and was raised. And today, North Korea is a territory of absolute secrecy. It is almost impossible to escape from there. But the paradox is that those who manage to do it still feel proud of their homeland. They may run away, but they remain proud. Why? How can a country that is constantly under sanctions, and sometimes cannot even feed its own people, build nuclear weapons? Why has North Korea not collapsed like the Soviet Union or the regimes of Eastern Europe, and yet also not allowed Western capitalists in, like China or Vietnam? And most importantly, how does Kim Jong Un manage to hold on to power so firmly that 25 million North Koreans no longer even remember that their country was ever ruled by anyone outside this dynasty? Kim's Korea, the Democratic People's Republic, has existed for 74 years. That's 5 years longer than the mighty Soviet Union lasted. But note this, in the USSR, several different leaders managed to rule the country during that time, while in Korea, only 3 have ruled: Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un, and as you can easily guess from their last names, they are related, grandfather, father, and son. So, it's clear from the start that North Korea is not about communism, not about the power of the people, and not even about the power of the party. It is the personal regime of one specific family. And somehow, for 75 years, they've managed to hold millions of people under their rule. Let's rewind exactly 70 years. This is how American planes, sparing no bombs, leveled the capital of North Korea, Pyongyang. The numbers, 9,000 tons. Hard to imagine whether that's a lot or a little. The correct answer, way too much. During 3 years of the Korean War, about 200,000 bombs fell on Pyongyang, roughly one for every resident. And this elderly man, Curtis LeMay, who commanded the U.S. Air Force's strategic forces, reported that his pilots had burned down every house in North Korea. Later, he even complained to his superiors that he had no targets left. And indeed, besides houses, they also destroyed dams, flooded rivers, and wiped out fields, along with the North Korean harvest. Now, those familiar with history might say, wait a second, North Korea was the one that attacked the South first. If it hadn't been for U.S. forces, Kim Il-sung would have simply captured the entire Korean peninsula with his army. And you're right, that's exactly what happened. For those who don't know, here's a brief recap. After World War II, Korea was divided into 2 parts. The North, run by communists, and the South, supported by pro-American allies. On June 25, 1950, DPRK troops invaded the South, capturing 90% of its territory, leaving only a small pocket near the port of Busan. U.S. forces, together with the UN, helped the South Koreans hold out, launched a counteroffensive and nearly captured the North themselves, destroying everything in their path with air power. But China and the USSR had no desire to see U.S. imperialists right on their border. They intervened directly, and the war returned to where it had started, the border drawn along the 38th parallel. By 1953, both sides were exhausted and signed an armistice. Since then, two Koreas have existed on the map, North and South. The South has been actively supported by the United States with money, technology, and military protection. The North, meanwhile, was backed by China and the Soviet Union. Throughout this entire period, until 1994, the country was ruled by one man, Kim Il-sung. But from being a wartime leader, he transformed himself not just into a great leader, like Stalin, but, thanks to North Korean propaganda, into the son of the nation, effectively, a god in North Korea. How did he achieve this? Remember, I began by saying American bombers had burned down the entire country, forcing its people to hide underground. That's hardly a victory. Yet Kim Il-sung reframed it exactly that way. On the ruins of his own capital, he held a military parade and celebrated victory in what he called the Great Patriotic Liberation War, which he himself had started by attacking his neighbor. But it didn't matter. The Soviet Union was ready to bankroll generous aid. Engineers, architects, and consultants from friendly communist states poured into Korea, helping rebuild the DPRK, and soon, it was developing even faster than its southern neighbor. Kim Il-sung's authority grew, and, as it did, new cities rose. Take Pyongyang, for instance. It looked strikingly similar to East Berlin or Moscow. Look at Pyongyang's TV tower. then at Berlin's, and then at Moscow's. And kinda hard to tell the difference. And what's important is that this model, socialist urban paradise, arose in a country where, until recently, 80% of the population were peasants. Of course, they were surprised and thrilled. And under the cover of this patriotic enthusiasm, Kim Il-sung eliminated all opposition, consolidating his cult of personality, the cult of the father of the nation. And here comes the key point, one that propaganda throughout history, in every country, has always loved to exploit. Just so you understand, during the Korean War, Pyongyang lost about 1 million people. That's a lot, and when your total population is only 10 million, that's an enormous number. Now imagine how many children were left as orphans. What did Kim Il-sung do? He ordered the construction of orphanages and schools for the children, who were called martyrs of the motherland. The orphans were fed, clothed, cared for, and given education. But at the same time, they were raised with the conviction that their father was none other than Kim himself. A vivid example of this is the Manjeondae School for the Orphan Children of Revolutionaries. It was opened in the very place where Kim Il-sung was born. Its graduates would go on to become the future elite of the armed forces and the state security service. In other words, the leader was strategically raising those on whom he would rely. But the truth is that today, the North Korean regime also relies on information technology. Just 10 years ago, at the very beginning of Kim Jong Un's rule, Seoul recorded 155 million attempted cyber attacks from North Korea. Every hour, that's 17 attempts every second. Between 2016 and 2018, North Korean hackers looted global cryptocurrency exchanges for more than $1 billion. But clearly, even a country like North Korea cannot function without skilled IT specialists. And now, take a close look at these propaganda artworks, mosaics, and statues of Kim Il-sung. In them, he appears not only as a father, but also as a loving mother. See how tenderly he presses to his broad-chested children, wounded soldiers, peasants, and the elderly. This is no accident. These values are the foundation of every religion, cult, or sect. They try to replace the family itself. Think about it. Coincidence or not? Did I make this up? Let's see. Kim Il-sung's father was a school teacher, and his mother was the daughter of a school principal, and they were also active Christians in Eastern Korea. Detail number 2. Kim Il-sung's idol was Joseph Stalin. And do you know what Stalin studied to become in his youth? A priest. And then what did he do? In a godless country, he built an openly religious the Stalins or Kim Il-sung's, but both men clearly understood what they were building. And here's my hint for you. This is the mix from which the perfect dictatorship is made. Now let's go further. Why on earth does the state try to replace the family? What is family? Care. Kim Il-sung cares for everyone, but family is also safety. And this is where the issue of nuclear weapons appears, or more precisely, the desire to obtain them. Let's return to the brutal American bombings. You know, that actually wasn't the worst-case scenario. A harsher option from the United States would have been to drop not hundreds of thousands of bombs on Pyongyang, but a few nuclear warheads just as they did at the end of World War II. With Japan, you've surely heard of the cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and this is what they looked like after a single explosion. Just so you understand, during the Korean War, Pyongyang lost about 1 million people. That's a lot, and when your total population is only 10 million, that's an enormous number. Now imagine how many children were left as orphans. What did Kim Il-sung do? He ordered the construction of orphanages and schools for the children who were called martyrs of the motherland. The orphans were fed, clothed, cared for, and given education. But at the same time, they were raised with the conviction that their father was none other than Kim himself. A vivid example of this is the Manjeondae School for the Orphan Children of Revolutionaries. It was opened in the very place where Kim Il-sung was born. Its graduates would go on to become the future elite of the armed forces and the state security service. In other words, the leader was strategically raising those on whom he would rely. But the truth is that today the North Korean regime also relies on information technology. Just 10 years ago, at the very beginning of Kim Jong Un's rule, Seoul recorded 155 million attempted cyber attacks from North Korea every hour. That's 17 attempts every second. Between 2016 and 2018, North Korean hackers looted global cryptocurrency exchanges for more than $1 billion. But clearly, even a country like North Korea cannot function without skilled IT specialists. And now, take a close look at these propaganda artworks, mosaics, and statues of Kim Il-sung. In them, he appears not only as a father but also as a loving mother. See how tenderly he presses to his broad-chested children, wounded soldiers, peasants, and the elderly. This is no accident. These values are the foundation of every religion, cult, or sect. They try to replace the family itself. Think about it. Coincidence or not? Did I make this up? Let's see. Kim Il-sung's father was a school teacher, and his mother was the daughter of a school principal, and they were also active Christians in Eastern Korea. Detail number 2. Kim Il-sung's idol was Joseph Stalin. And do you know what Stalin studied to become in his youth? A priest. And then what did he do? In a godless country, he built an openly religious cult of personality. And no, I'm not saying that all children of teachers and priests turn into Stalins or Kim Il-sungs, but both men clearly understood what they were building. And here's my hint for you. This is the mix from which the perfect dictatorship is made. Now let's go further. Why on earth does the state try to replace the family? What is family? Care. Kim Il-sung cares for everyone. But family is also safety. And this is where the issue of nuclear weapons appears, or more precisely, the desire to obtain them. Let's return to the brutal American bombings. You know, that actually wasn't the worst-case scenario. A harsher option from the United States would have been to drop not hundreds of thousands of bombs on Pyongyang, but a few nuclear warheads just as they did at the end of World War II with Japan. You've surely heard of the cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this is what they looked like after a single explosion. By the way, it was precisely these American nuclear threats that essentially brought the Korean War to a halt. What does Kim Il-sung do? He fully understands that the Americans could, at any moment, do to him exactly what they had done to Japan. And, as the just-ended war had shown, allies could not always be counted on to arrive quickly, so he sends his scientists abroad to gain knowledge and training here, to Dubna near Moscow, to the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research. There, scientists from Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Vietnam, the German Democratic Republic, and Korea lived and worked. And in 1964, in North Korea's Yongbyon, with the help of the USSR, they established their own nuclear research center and even installed a Soviet reactor there. But that still wasn't a bomb, and Moscow, for its part, wasn't exactly rushing to hand over nuclear technology because just 2 years earlier, in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis had erupted. What happened? The Americans had placed nuclear missiles in Turkey, right next to Soviet borders. In response, the Soviets placed missiles in Cuba. The US didn't like that. They blockaded the island, and for 2 weeks the entire world waited for the start of nuclear war between the USSR and the USA. But President Kennedy and General Secretary Khrushchev struck a deal. The Soviets dismantled their missiles in Cuba, in exchange for an American pledge not to invade Fidel Castro's Cuba and to remove their nuclear warheads from Turkey. The deal went through. War was averted. Everyone was relieved, except North Korea, because there, the lesson was clear. The USSR could, without hesitation, sell out its allies if its own security was at stake. So why wait for help? It might never come. North Korea would have to develop nuclear weapons and every other kind of weapon on its own. And indeed, North Korea's military-industrial budget share rose dramatically, from a meager 4 to 5% in 1956 to 30% in 1966. And what happened next? The rescued people of North Korea began to consider Kim almost saint-like. He had defended the country, won the war, united the people, and fed them. There had been hunger and disease, and now, at least in Pyongyang, hospitals and clinics stood on every corner. It almost feels as if I'm not talking about North Korea half a century ago. But the path ahead was far from easy. The USSR collapsed. China turned west. Foreign aid dwindled. Kim Il-sung died. And then came the devastating famine of the 1990s. Yet even under such dire circumstances, the Kim family held on to power. Just like today, myths swirled around North Korea, that people there still eat grass, that officials are executed by guns or rocket launchers for watching foreign films. The more monstrous the lie, the easier it is to believe. And add to this the strange videos of people crying at the mere sight of their leaders, applauding like robots, and you start believing any outlandish tale about the DPRK. But in reality, the Kim regime is highly calculating. Otherwise, it could never have survived this long. Look at the 1990s, when the country was ravaged by famine and most North Koreans looked like this. Support from the dead USSR or the half-capitalist China never came. Eventually, the UN began sending humanitarian aid, and the main donors in this story, North Korea's greatest enemies, the United States and South Korea. But even that wasn't enough. The North Korean government is forced to make concessions and allows a small degree of private trade. Makeshift markets appear, smuggling flourishes. As the saying goes, saving a drowning man is the work of the drowning man himself, everyone for themselves. State factories shut down, but men still go to work because they have to. Yet they earn nothing. The real entrepreneurs become their wives. By Korean tradition, they were supposed to stay home and raise children. But since children now had to be saved from starvation, the women went out to trade, and private business began to grow. But growing too much was dangerous. The regime could collapse, just as the USSR had. And so the second Kim Jong-il, made a shrewd move to preserve his power. He placed his bets on the military and announced the Songun policy, Army First. There were two reasons for this. First, North Korea's armed forces were larger than Russia's, even though North Korea had 5 times fewer people and 142 times less territory. If these soldiers lived poorly, they would be dissatisfied. And since they always carried a very weighty argument, they could topple the regime outright. The second reason, Kim Jong Un had just inherited power after his father's death, and he needed to build his own authority. The army didn't particularly respect him, not because he wore heels or glasses like Liza Minnelli, and even ended up topping a ranking of the top 25 men who look like old lesbians, but simply because he had no real military experience. Just like his father before, becoming leader, more propaganda than war, and to make sure the military didn't devour him along with expired Soviet canned meat. It was absolutely crucial for him to strengthen the security bloc and give them more privileges, expand the defense budget, make the military first in line when subsidies, monetary, or food were distributed. For himself, Kim had a clear calculation. For example, why pour money into an unbelievably expensive nuclear program? Because it was a way to avoid the fate of Gaddafi. For those who don't know, he was the dictator of Libya. When civil war broke out in the country, NATO forces intervened, and Gaddafi was killed. The moral of that story, without nuclear protection, you could face invasion and overthrow at any moment. Of course, today no Kim intends to launch nuclear weapons first. That would be suicide, since an American response would arrive with 100% certainty. But having a stockpile of nuclear can preserve itself indefinitely if it rests on 3 solid pillars. The first, it appeals to the common people. For this, North Korea has propaganda, which tells grand tales of great leaders, of a country surrounded on all sides by enemies, and of leaders who know how to protect it. The second pillar, the military, specifically, the senior officers. They must live well, and the Kims are no fools. Remember the numbers: military spending, nuclear weapons, development, and other strictly military privileges. And the third pillar, power must be backed by big business, you might say. Wait, this is North Korea. What business? Well, here's what. Under Kim Jong Un, when the regime was forced to loosen control, a new class of people emerged. Today they are called Donju, lords of money. These are high-ranking officials of the Workers' Party. Those same military leaders, those who manage state companies in North Korea, or those engaged in business abroad. These are officials who try to attract investment into North Korea or earn foreign currency. Security officers, and those married women who may not work for the state but, as it turned out, can successfully engage in private trade. And today, all these people have enough money to feel okay. And we're not talking about North Korean won, the local currency. These people earn and spend perfectly ordinary hostile American dollars. And when you look at this, you realize Kim Jong Un is using the classic scheme described in the works of Niccolò Machiavelli. Don't care about the people as a whole, but win over a small, chosen group. And so, about 1% of the North Korean population lives very well. They drive decent cars inside the country, vacation at resorts. Yes, the current Kim even built ski resorts, sports facilities. Even Western clothing flows into the country, not in a flood, but in a respectable stream, and these people cling to power. The Kim system once again began recording new cues in January. And now imagine, what if this Iron Curtain collapses? What will happen to your factory? Will it compete with South Korea's Hyundai or the Chinese? Remember what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union with ZIL or the Hungarian Icarus? And yet, those were produced by the millions and were everywhere. Now ZIL's conveyors produce just over 200,000 vehicles a year. In other words, the Kim regime is a guarantee of a solid lifestyle for such people. And Kim needs them because they kick back and sponsor his regime. Here's an example. Everyone makes fun of the state airline Air Koryo. It flies old planes and is considered the worst airline in the world, with 0 stars, running only 1 flight per day. True, but inside the country, they own a taxi service, a gas station network, a travel agency. They even produce cigarettes and canned food under their own brand. And all this with government approval. It's a kind of public-private partnership. The government frees itself from the hassle of production, logistics, and sales, but still controls everything and takes a cut, and quite a hefty cut. But wait a second. According to South Korean intelligence, Kim Jong Un has 33 residences in North Korea. 28 of them have railway stations. The residences are surrounded by multiple fences, connected by underground tunnels. Naturally, there are bunkers where the leader can hide from any strike. And now look at this clip. In 2018, a famous developer, also the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, showed one to Kim during a personal meeting. The message was, "Comrade Kim, we are ready to give you and your country all the opportunities of our investments in capitalism. We'll pump in so much money that your Pyongyang will become no worse than Miami. If you like, it can be like China or Vietnam. The Communist Party keeps political power, but the economy runs entirely on capitalist tracks. Or let's do it like Japan. They are the third largest economy in the world. We also control them, but they have a constitutional monarchy. Here's their emperor. You'll play roughly the same role. Let's skip the missiles, okay? A tempting offer, and many had agreed to such proposals, even those who already had nuclear weapons. But Kim Jong Un already had all this luxury, and he knows perfectly well. The guarantee of his survival is that very nuclear arsenal. Giving it up offers no guarantees at all. Multi-billion-dollar business sharks would devour him and his system in a few short years. Kim Jong Un was born in 1982, and he was old enough 9 years to remember the collapse of the USSR and the fall of communist regimes in Eastern Europe. Plus, he studied in Switzerland and knows Western values and the system from the inside. Remember, I said young Kim was a fan of basketball and the Chicago Bulls. Well, when he first came to power, few in the US knew what to expect from the chubby guy with the strange haircut. In the Obama administration, there was an idea to build bridges through a sort of basketball diplomacy. There was even talk of sending Michael Jordan to North Korea, but he refused. Diplomats claimed he was allegedly afraid of flying on such airlines. Maybe, but someone else agreed. A man who always said yes to the most outrageous things, Dennis Rodman, and, in the end, not once but several times, he traveled to He didn't just shoot hoops but personally drank with Kim, and even sang him a happy birthday song. Birthday. And in some way, basketball diplomacy, of course, helps. Well, the world sees that Americans are not being shot upon arrival on North Korean soil. And North Koreans, they play basketball. But in fact, for both one side and the other, this is just PR show for their domestic audiences. After several rounds of peace, friendship, and bubblegum between Kim and Rodman, it all ends, because the sincerity in it was exactly zero. Why? Would anyone need a leader of a country, and the country itself, which in all kinds of rankings is always at the very bottom? Is it really that attractive? Well, only as a threat that absolutely must be eliminated. Kim Jong Un and his predecessors, for themselves personally, to stay on the throne, do everything right. They eliminated all rivals inside the country, invented an ideology that works, acquired effective nuclear protection, and formed a circle of people who are deeply invested in keeping the Kims in power. And all this corresponds to a famous phrase: let a few people get rich first. Do you know who said it? Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who launched grand economic reforms, and essentially, thanks to him, China moved towards becoming a leading world economy. But the truth is, this phrase has a second part that many forget. Let a few people get rich first, and gradually, everyone should become rich. But the talent of a perfect dictator is, on the contrary, not to allow this. You must constantly scare those who already have money, that without him, without the ruler, they will become poor. And for those who have no money, you cannot let them starve to death. But at the same time, you cannot let them get rich either. Otherwise, they will learn too much and begin to claim their rights to power. So that you don't think I make up all my stories, I actually consume a lot of different information online. And I really love reading books. And specifically, while writing about North Korea, these two works helped me a lot. The Great Successor by Anna Fifield and The Accusation Trader in North Korea. Highly recommend. I want to raffle them off, maybe with my notes in them, or maybe I'll buy new ones and send them to you. To take part, please write in the comments how you think an ordinary person with no access to power should behave in such countries. What is the best strategy to survive and to win? For the most interesting comments, the ones I like best, I'll send these two books. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to react with likes and shares, and you can support me by becoming a sponsor of the channel on platforms like Boosty and Patreon.